my dear friend Sri D.L.N. Rao, Senior Advocate, Bangalore, and all the respected participants in this program, and in particular, my dear students. I consider it a privilege to have been provided this opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. We are holding this program in memory of His Holiness Keshavananda Bharati Swamiji, who attained lotus feet of Lord on the 6th of this month at Ednur Mutt, Kasaragod Taluk. The Swamiji has many spiritual attainments besides teaching religious tenets. He also encouraged art and culture. In particular, he was very fond of Yakshagana, and he also used to sing in those programs. He passed away at the age of 80. He is the person responsible for the doctrine of basic structure of the Constitution because of the writ petition filed by him. And this doctrine of basic structure is a great contribution in the field of law, constitutional law in particular, not only in India, even the world over. Though His Holiness is no more, his name will always be remembered in the legal field, at least in our country. I knew His Holiness very closely, and whenever I met him, we always used to talk in Tulu, a language from coastal district of Karnataka. Now, the topic chosen is an important one. Before dealing with the topic of evolution of the doctrine, it will be useful to refer very briefly to the framing of our Constitution, which is hailed as one of the best federal constitutions in the world. The Constituent Assembly was presided over by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who later became the first president of India. And the drafting committee was presided by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. All the stalwarts and legal luminaries of the day participated in the discussion of the Constituent Assembly before they adopted the Constitution. In fact, the Constituent Assembly met and deliberated to finalize the Constitution for a period of 2 years, 11 months and 17 days. And ultimately the Constitution was adopted on 26th of November 1949. It came into force on 26th of January 2050. Though there are many people who have made their own contribution for the drafting of the Constitution, one person's whom name I should mention here is Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao, popularly known as Sir B.N. Rao. He was the advisor to the Constituent Assembly, and he worked in that capacity honorarily. Dr. Sir B.N. Rao, hailing from Karnataka, was a brilliant legal luminary who, though an ICS, became a judge of the Calcutta High Court, and later, after many assignments, he worked as the advisor to the Constituent Assembly, in which capacity he toured so many countries and thoroughly studied the constitutions of various other countries in the world, and then gave his valuable advice, which ultimately helped us to have the Constitution today. I deem it proper that we should remember his contribution in the making of the Constitution on this occasion. As you all know, a Constitution, though is expected to be there for a long time to come, for the future also, it is not possible for anyone to foresee all the contingencies. Therefore, while the Constitution is a permanent document not to be tinkered with easily, it is also necessary that at times it may become necessary to effect amendments to the Constitution because of the social changes and other needs. Therefore, our Constitution, founding fathers have inserted Article 368, providing for amendment of the Constitution. It provided that Constitution can be amended by resolution by both the houses of Parliament with 2/3 majority of the total number and 1/2 of the total number and 2/3 of the members who were present and voting. And in the case pertaining to certain state subjects, it provided that after the two houses pass the resolution, it should also be ratified by majority of the state legislatures. This is the provision for amendment as provided in Article 368. Now, immediately after the Constitution came into force, the government had to bring in some radical reforms, particularly in the agriculture sector, like Land Reforms Act and Zamindari Abolition Act, etc. When these enactments were challenged before a court of law as offending fundamental rights provided in Part 3 of the Constitution, the courts had to strike down these enactments. The government had at that stage no other goal but to bring about constitutional amendments so as to save these enactments relating to land reforms. That is how, for the first time, the Constitution was amended, giving protection to these progressive pieces of legislation. Now, these progressive pieces of legislations were protected by the Constitution. The Constitution was amended accordingly. Then, naturally, the landlords affected approached the court challenging the Constitution amendment itself. It is at that stage that the Supreme Court had to consider the validity of the Constitution amendment. And the first case in this behalf was case of Shankari Prasad, the Supreme Court upheld the validity of the Constitution Amendment. In those days, the power of the Parliament to amend was not seriously questioned. The attack was on the basis that the procedure has not been properly followed and that the amendment goes contrary to the Article 13.2 of the Constitution. Article 13.2 says that any law made by Parliament, if it offends the fundamental rights, that will be void. So here they said the Constitution amendment brought about offends fundamental right and therefore it should be declared void. Now this was repelled by saying that Article 13 applies only to ordinary law. Law in Article 13.2 only refers to ordinary legislation but not Constitution amendment, and therefore it can't be challenged on the ground of offending Part 3 of the Constitution. Thus, the Constitution amendments were upheld and all these progressive legislations were also became valid. Thereafter, the same position continued. The power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution was almost totally recognized, unlimited power. And later on in the year 1965, again similar amendment was challenged, and in the case of Sajjan Singh, that was also upheld by the Supreme Court. Thus, from 1950 till 1967, the power of the Parliament to amend was considered to be unlimited and without any restriction. However, in the year 1967, there one of the cases that came up for consideration, which is popularly known as Golaknath case. In that case, a bench of 11 judges presided over by Chief Justice K. Subbarao considered the validity of the amendment brought out by the government. In that case, for the first time, by a majority of 6-5, the Supreme Court held that whatever be the power of amendment available to the Parliament has no power to amend Part 3 of the Constitution, that is the fundamental rights. It also held that Constitution amendment, if any, also is law within the meaning of Article 13.2, and therefore, if any Constitution amendment offends fundamental rights, it will be banned. The result is, the final conclusion was that the Parliament has no power to amend the fundamental rights chapter in Part 3. This decision was very much against the government and Parliament, and the government of the day, they were very much worried because their power of amending the Constitution is curtailed by this judgment. Then, immediately after this position in 1967, there were also certain other enactments like bank nationalization and abolition of privy purse. These were also validity of this law was challenged, and 2 11-judge bench decisions held against the government both in bank nationalization case as well as in the privy purse case. Thereafter came Kerala Land Reforms Act. Kerala Land Reforms Act very seriously affected the rights of Sri Keshavananda Bharati Swamiji, whose mutt, Ednir Mutt, had a large extent of properties in Kerala, and they were affected by this legislation. So Sri Keshavananda Bharati challenged the constitutional validity of Land Reforms Act before the Supreme Court. At the same time, the Parliament also passed certain constitutional amendments, bringing even Kerala Land Reforms Act into Schedule 9 of the Constitution so that it will be beyond the power of the court to go into the validity of the enactment. So all these matters, therefore, Keshavananda Bharati had to naturally challenge the validity of all these constitutional amendments also. So all these matters came up before the Supreme Court, and since the correctness of Golaknath case was also challenged and was in doubt, the then Chief Justice Sikri constituted a bench of 13 judges because to consider the correctness of the Golaknath case, it was necessary to have a bench larger than 11 judges, and therefore a 13-judge bench was constituted. Now, this is a historical event, this case, because in the entire history of the Supreme Court, as large a bench as 13 judges never sat. This is the only instance where 13 judges sat. In all other cases, we have as many as 8 cases where 11 judges have sat. But 13 judges sitting, this is the only case which went into the question of power of the Parliament to amend the Constitution. The case was hotly contested, and both sides very eager to have judgments in their favor. All the top lawyers in the country have appeared in the matter. The petitioners had engaged Nani Palkiwala, one of the foremost jurists and lawyers of our country, and there were also Sri Soli Surabji, Sri Daftari had all appeared on behalf of the petitioners. On behalf of the government, the Attorney General Nirende was there, and the main person who defended was H.M. Sirwai, who was then the Advocate General of Maharashtra, who has written the book on constitutional law, a well-known jurist and a top advocate of the country. Now, the matter was argued for about 6 months, which is also a record. In fact, it is seen that on 68 full days, the court sat and heard the arguments on both sides. And the constitutions of as many as 71 countries were considered by the Supreme Court, and as many as 25 law lexicons were referred to. The material produced by the parties before the court, not only on mere law, but also on political science, sociology, and philosophy, and economics, and other things. Large volume of material was placed before the court. In fact, one judge has referred to it as the volume produced is so much. It was a case of acres of paper and usage of rivers of ink. These were the materials which were produced before the court. And as I said, it was argued at great length. But with all this, the bench had to give a decision quickly because the Chief Justice who was presiding over the bench was to retire on 24th of April, 73. And there are hardly 2 or 3 months left for pronouncement of the judgment. So they were in a hurry to see that the matter was decided before the Chief Justice retired. Of course, on behalf of the government, it is said the government wanted to delay the matter. They did not even mind an adjournment so that a new bench will consider the question. Therefore, when it came to a question, it was said that one of the judges fell ill and he was admitted to hospital. And the Chief Justice went to find out whether he was really ill. And it is seen that he was only suffering from blood pressure and therefore he agreed to come back and continue the proceedings. With all these attempts, ultimately on the 24th of April, one day before the retirement of Chief Justice Sikri, the judgment was pronounced. Now, out of 13 judges, 11 judges wrote separate opinions. Probably it is said there was no time for them to exchange briefs and to find out a unanimity among them. Therefore, each one had written a judgment. Only 2 judges did not write. That is, Justice Mukherjee agreed with Hegde, and another judge, that is and Justice Grover agreed with Justice Shawat. So 2 didn't write. Other 11 wrote separate judgments. The ultimate result of the judgment was that it was not a unanimous judgment, but a sharply divided judgment. 7:6. 6 of the judges who were in a minority held that the parliament had unlimited and unrestricted power to amend. And there is no limitation on the power. Because if you read the text of Article 368 only, it doesn't place any restriction. It only says amend. So the whole argument was on this expression amend. They went into some 25 dictionaries to find out the meaning of the word amend. So 6 took that view that the parliament's power is unquestioned. But 7 took a contra view. Of the 7, each one gave his own reason or expression of the restriction. What is the limitation? What is the restriction? That way, the Chief Justice Sikri said, your power doesn't enable you to change the fundamental features of the Constitution so as to destroy its identity. That is how he put it. Within these limits, Parliament can amend. Justice Shawat and Gover said, it does not enable abrogation of basic elements of the Constitution or constitutional structure or denude of them of their identity. You cannot denude the Constitution of its identity. Justice Hegde said the power does not include the power to destroy or emasculate the basic elements of the Constitution. And Justice Jagan Mohan Reddy also said it doesn't enable you to abrogate or emasculate or damage any of the fundamental rights are essential elements in the basic structure of the Constitution or destroy the identity of the Constitution. These were the different expressions used. And then lastly, it was Justice H.R. Khanna. He said it does not include the power to alter the basic structure or framework of the Constitution. Thus, generally, the judges give their opinion. Ultimately, we, the lawyers, subsequently have to find out what is the majority view. But in this particular case, immediately after the judgment, the Chief Justice also prepared a note and gave a short note of the majority opinion. And that majority opinion, apart from certain other things which are not material, on the crucial question, this judgment of 11 judges running into more than 700 pages in the reported decision and containing 2,700 and odd paragraphs. And therefore, different views on different aspects. But the crux of the matter was this: to what extent the power of the parliament to amend is there, whether there is restriction or no restriction. So far as the minority views is concerned, there is no difficulty. 6 of them said unlimited power. You can't question. They said from first article to last article also, you can change everything. Virtually, they only said you can't repeal it. Short of that, anything you can do. Now, because of these divergent views of the 7 judges, which is later considered as the majority view, which is binding, this last note is given. It reads like this: the view by the majority in these petitions is as follows. 1, Golaknath case overruled. They said the view in Golaknath that part 3, the fundamental rights cannot be amended, all the rest you can amend, is not correct. Even fundamental right can be amended. But the crucial is point number 2. This is what they say. Though it is hundreds of pages and thousands of paragraphs, the ratio of the case, as students of law, you will all be knowing, it is the ratio which is binding, and where the judges write very lengthy judgments, it becomes difficult even for experienced lawyers to find out what exactly is the ratio. Now here they said this is the ratio, and that reads very short. Article 368 does not enable Parliament to alter the basic structure or framework of the Constitution. This is the single sentence which gives the basic structure doctrine. This is culled out, we have to cull it out from this. For the first time, by these judgments, the majority propounded and evolved the doctrine of basic structure. What that basic structure is, I'll come later. This is the majority view, but one important aspect is even this majority view, all the 13 judges were not prepared to sign it. In fact, we find from the original records and also the report, the decision of the 13, only 9 judges signed this majority opinion. The remaining 4, including Justice A.N. Ray did not sign it. Of the 7 judges, after 7 judges, the 2 others who have taken minority view, who have also signed this as the majority view, are Justice Chandrachud and Justice Palekar. Thus, this final thing is signed by 9 judges, and this is taken as the ultimate majority decision in this Keshavananda Bharati case, which evolved the doctrine of basic structure. Naturally, the government headed by Srimati Indira Gandhi in those days, they were terribly upset by this judgment. Between Golaknath and Keshavananda Bharati, there was a real tussle between the parliament and the government on the one side and judiciary on the other side. As I told you, the Golaknath case was a setback for the government. Then Privy versus case and bank nationalization case, that was also a setback. In this, the government had tried all means to see that it succeeds and the power of parliament to amend is accepted, but they lost. It has so much of, it was worried so much about the result and was very unhappy. And it was to such an extent that this judgment was delivered in the morning. And by evening, 5 o'clock, the government of India announced that though the convention is senior-most judge becomes the Chief Justice, and in order of seniority, after S.M. Sikri, who was to retire next day, Justice Shalat, Justice K.S. Hegde, and Justice Gurova were to be the Chief Justices for the next couple of years. By evening of 24th, the government appointed 4th Judge, Justice A.N. Ray, as the Chief Justice of India. Because he had given a judgment, minority view, in favor of the government, whereas 3 judges, Justice Shalat, Hegde, and Grover, had given the majority view. That they were superseded, and A.N. Ray became the Chief Justice of India. Though there was very strong protest all over the country, particularly by the legal fraternity, because a very well-accepted convention has been taken away and independence of the judiciary is at stake. But nothing could be done. Justice Ray, A.N. Ray became the Chief Justice of India, and the 3 judges resigned as judges of the Supreme Court. This was the after effect of this judgment. But then, after Chief Justice Ray became the Chief Justice, and the government still wanted to fight out and see that this judgment is reviewed. After all, it was a majority of 1. Therefore, an attempt was made to review this judgment. Chief Justice Ray constituted a bench of 13 judges because lesser number contribute. It is only 13 who could review. And Chief Justice Sikri and 3 judges who were in majority have already either resigned or retired. So an attempt was made to review this judgment. It is in that stage that again the team of advocates led by Palkhiwala very strongly opposed the constitution of this bench and the attempt to review the judgment in Keshwananda Bharati case. The matter went on for 2 days. Sri Palkiwala questioned the very constitution of the bench because technically there was no review petition filed by anybody. And when he repeatedly asked at whose instance this review, the Chief Justice once said that it is Tamil Nadu government. Immediately Advocate General Tamil Nadu said, no, we have not filed review. We don't want. Then some other organization, they also said we have not said it. Thus, but I am told it is a matter of record. 2 days, Sri Palkiwala argued so eloquently that on the third day, as the hearing was in progress, third day morning, bench assembled and Chief Justice Ray said, this bench is dissolved. There is no further record in the Supreme Court about this review. Either dismissal or allowing or anything about this review. There the attempt to get this judgment reviewed through a larger bench failed. In fact, Justice Khanna, who was in both the benches, has remarked about the argument of Palkiwala. He said it is not Nani who argued, but it is the divinity in him which expressed itself. To that extent, so nice. And the government itself tried to justify supersession of other 3 judges and bringing Chief Justice Ray. The government tried to defend by saying that we want forward-looking judges. In other words, they wanted to say progressive judges who philosophy of the government, following the philosophy of. So he said, we want forward-looking judges, so we have appointed Ray. For that, Chief Justice Hidayatullah, who is known for his humor, said, it is correct that we want forward-looking judges, but not judges looking forward. Now today, there are many judges who are looking forward. It may be the post of membership of Rajya Sabha or governor of a state, or there are posts of chairman of so many tribunals. Because earlier executive had no authority to give any post-retirement benefits to judges. But today, the situation has changed. This is the one position which I incidentally mentioned to show how, as on today, judiciary is not as independent as it was because of these judges looking forward. Now, after this, one thought that the law in Keshwananda Bharati has become final. But one more attempt was made, it was a little later. But before doing that, let me briefly deal with the doctrine of basic structure, what it means. Now, the judgment and the ratio, as I said, apart from saying you cannot alter the basic structure or framework, never said which is basic structure. Now, in a constitution, it is very difficult to say which is basic feature or basic structure and which is not. In fact, the 6 judges holding minority view, that was their point. Constitution is one. Every article is important. you can't say these articles form the essential features and these articles do not become essential features. You can't make that distinction. But 7 majority judges, though the expression used is different, they held some of these are basic or fundamental or essential features which can't be touched. Just like saying in a building, the structure you can't demolish or destroy, but other minor changes you can make. But in a constitution, it is difficult to find out basic, which is not. So, the effect of the judgment is, as all of you know, the Supreme Court has the absolute power to interpret the Constitution. It is so everywhere. Even in United States, it is the Supreme Court which interprets the Constitution. In fact, one Supreme Court judge has once said, Constitution is what we say it is. Whatever be the text, it is the interpretation which we give. That will be the Constitution. To that, according to me, here they have added one more thing. It is basic structure is what we say is basic structure, because nobody can challenge it. Whether a particular enactment or amendment is basic, it destroys or alters basic structure or not, whatever decision they give, we have to accept it, because there is no other forum this could be challenged. Nor can it even be by amending the Constitution, because what is struck down is the amendment of the Constitution itself. So there is no remedy. So by this doctrine, this judgment, additional power is entrusted to the Supreme Court to decide what is basic structure. And I will show how, though in most of the cases, the Supreme Court has taken correct decision in one matter relating to appointment of judges to the higher judiciary, this principle has been violated by the Supreme Court itself by misinterpreting what basic structure is. I'll come to it a little later. But before doing that, what is basic structure as explained in this Keshavananda Bharati case itself, I will briefly state. In the judgment itself, they have said, unity and integrity of the nation is one basic structure. Supremacy of constitution, republican and democratic form of government is basic structure. Now, democratic form of government, should it be only parliamentary or otherwise, it is not clear. Now, democracy, well, it is basic structure. But should it only be parliamentary or presidential form of government? Presidential form of government is also democratic form, as we have in United States. It is basic structure. Then rule of law is basic structure. Then most important, power of judicial review. In a large number of cases, they said any constitution amendment which takes away the power of judicial review from the judiciary, that will be struck down. They have struck down so many enactments. The latest one with regard to the constitution of so many tribunals by the executive and under their control, they said they all infringe the basic structure of the constitution and therefore the enactment was struck down. Then independence of the judiciary is basic structure. But in a given case, whether the independence is taken away or not is a matter of interpretation, with which I'll deal a little later. Then, soon after the then I will deal with two more. Separation of powers. Three organs: executive, legislature, and the judiciary. Federalism. It can't be a unitary system. It should be a federalism. Then secularism. Then in this very judgment, they say, one judge says, dignity and freedom of the individual. These are all held to be the basic structure of the Constitution. Now, human ingenuity, we don't know. The law is progressing. New legislations or new writ petitions are filed. Only the other day, in Rajasthan, Speaker gave notice to the dissidents who are trying to topple the government with under the leadership of Sachin Pilot. And Speaker gave notice of disqualification under Schedule 10, Clause 1. That is, you have voluntarily given up membership. Now, that notice is challenged before Rajasthan High Court. And one of the ground urged is this very clause in 10th schedule is violative of basic structure because of freedom of speech and expression is a fundamental right and it is a part of basic structure. You take away from my right of criticism even of my party. If I criticize the leadership for any wrong, you say you are liable to be disqualified. That offends basic structure. Therefore, even this clause 1 of 10th schedule is opposed. No, Rajasthan High Court did not have occasion to deal with it. I am only mentioning how new grounds are being urged by the lawyers to get rid of a constitutional provision. Now, after the Keshavananda Bharati case, one of the earliest cases where the court had to consider whether a constitution amendment violates the basic structure or not is the case of Indira Gandhi herself. Her election was set aside by the Allahabad High Court. She filed an appeal before Supreme Court. And in the meantime, Constitution is amended to nullify the judgment of the High Court holding her election bad. And therefore, 39th Constitution Amendment was introduced. No challenge to the election if she becomes the Prime Minister or a Speaker. For that, there should be a separate forum like that. And also certain other provisions. It is not necessary to go into them in detail. All the provisions were enacted just to save the election of the Prime Minister to get over the judgment of the Allahabad High Court. A constitution bench heard this election petition along with the question of validity of 39th Constitution Amendment. In that, it is very interesting. The bench consisted of 5 judges and Chief Justice was Justice A.N. Ray and Justice Chandrachud was also in the bench. Justice Khanna was also in the bench. Justice Matthew was also in the bench. They were all there in the Keshavananda Bharati case also. So here they had to consider the validity of this. Now, the contention was that this amendment is opposed to the basic structure, and the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that even a free and fair election is also a part of the basic feature of the Constitution. And since this Constitution amendment is against the basic structure doctrine. 39th amendment was struck down by a majority of 3. Justice Ray and Justice Matthew held that it is valid. But the other 3 judges, including Justice Chandrachud, who was in the minority in Keshavananda Bharati case, here he said, today the Constitution bench of 5 will have to decide on the basis of a binding precedent in Keshavananda Bharati. That case is by 13 judges. That is binding on me. So, testing it on the basis of that, I hold this 39th amendment is bad. That is judicial discipline. Whatever be your view at one point of time, today you are bound by it. So, this Indira Gandhi's case itself is the first case where the Constitution amendment was struck down on the ground that it violated the basic feature of the Constitution. Now, these are the main elements of basic feature. Now, after all these, also the government was not willing to accept this as the final word. Now, in Keshavananda Bharati, though basic structure doctrine was evolved, they never said you can't amend 368, which gave the power of amendment. 368, one view was that it only provided procedure, not power. But for that, the Constitution was amended as if it gave power. And the Keshavananda Bharati case, that amendment of 368 was upheld because they said the earlier provision also gave that power. This only clarifies it. It is not mere procedure, but source of power to amend. Therefore, amendment to 368 has also been upheld there. Therefore, the government thought, now we can amend 368. So, they inserted clause 4 and 5 to Article 368. Now, that is found in 42nd Constitution Amendment. Because of brute majority available, 42nd Constitution Amendment is one which had amended so many provisions in the Constitution, very radical changes. But soon thereafter, Janata Party came to power, and therefore the government, new government headed by Janata Party, took away the effect of 42nd Amendment by introducing 44th Amendment. So most of the clauses were not relevant. But this amendment to the Article 368 was very important. No, Constitution. Under this, clause 4 and 5 was added to Article 368. 4 said, any law, if it is promulgated for the purpose of giving effect to directive principles of state policy, such a law can't be questioned as violating Article 14 or Article 19. So that gave unlimited power of legislation or constitution amendment if it is to serve the purpose of directive principles. And second clause, fifth clause said no amendment by under Article 368 shall be called in question in court, and the court has no power to, the power to amend the constitution is unlimited. In fact, the entire effect of the judgment in Keshavananda Bharati case was sought to be nullified by this amendment of Article 368. Now, this amendment, had it stood the test of time, probably Keshavananda Bharati case and the doctrine of basic structure would have been lost. But fortunately, this particular 42nd amendment came up for consideration before a constitution bench of the Supreme Court in the year 1980, in the case which is known as Minerva Mills case. This is, according to me, is an equally important case as Minerva Mills, if not more important than that, for various reasons. Now, in this case, was heard by a bench of only 5 judges, and they had to consider the constitutional validity of 42nd Amendment, particular section, section 55, adding clause 4 and 5 to 368, which gave unlimited power to the Parliament to amend the Constitution. And this matter came up in Minerva Mills. It was Justice Chandrachud who was the Chief Justice of India, and he presided over the bench of these 5 judges. And it is in this case one more attempt by the Parliament and the executive government to restore unlimited power to the Parliament to amend the Constitution. In this case, Justice P.N. Bhagwati was also a member. At the time of delivery of the judgment, 4 judges unanimously held, and Justice Chandrachud, as Chief Justice, wrote the opinion for the 4 judges. He held that since we are bound by Keshavananda Bharati judgment, following the doctrine of basic structure, with which he respectfully agreed, and held that this amendment to the Constitution alters or destroys the basic structure, and therefore it is bad. Now, this is the most important judgment. Supposing in this case, out of 5 judges, if the majority had taken the view that this doesn't affect basic structure, then you see the entire doctrine of basic structure would not have continued. Therefore, according to me, though the basic structure doctrine is evolved in Keshavananda Bharati, the judgment in Minerva Mills case gave added strength to that doctrine, and the structure is reinforced by this judgment, which repeatedly reiterated and reaffirmed the supremacy of the doctrine of basic structure. Therefore, I say, as on today, it is the Minerva Mills case which is also equally important. And with this judgment, all attempt by the Parliament or the government to get back the power of amendment, irrespective of the basic structure doctrine, came to an end. And Keshavananda Bharati and Minerva Mills case became the law of the land. Now it is more than 40 years, even this Minerva Mills case judgment stood the test of time. It is 47 years. Keshavananda Bharati stood the test of time. Therefore, as on today, I do not think anybody will ever think of changing this law. And this is the law of the land. This is, as I said, is a great contribution of the Indian Supreme Court to the constitutional law, not only of this country, but also elsewhere, because I am told this doctrine, which is a novel one, is copied and followed in many other countries wherever there is an attempt to destroy the basic feature of a constitution. Now, I will show how this basic feature of the Constitution is wrongly interpreted by the Supreme Court and its effect. I'll deal with it very shortly. As you know, the power of appointing judges to the High Court and Supreme Court vested with the executive. Constitution even today says the president shall appoint. President means aided by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Central government will appoint in consultation with the Chief Justice of India. And that was the law. Consultation means only effective consultation, not concurrence. But unfortunately, what is known as second judge's case in 1993, from 1950 to 93, it is the executive which had the last word. In 93, in the second judge's case, they said 9-judge bench interpreting the Constitution, and it is virtually erroneous interpretation. They said where there is difference between the executive and the CJI, the views of the CJI will prevail. And they introduced as basic structure in this the doctrine of a collegium to select judges. Collegium consists of Chief Justice and 2 senior-most judges. In the case of Supreme Court, in the case of High Court, Chief Justice and 4 senior-most judges. In the case of Supreme Court, like a collegium system is brought about by this second judge's case, which is totally wrong. According to me, by this, the Supreme Court rewrote the Constitution or amended the Constitution so far as appointment of judges is concerned. In fact, even all authors and jurists agree it's a case of rewriting the Constitution. Important power vested with the executive is taken away and it is given to the collegium. Now, my submission is virtually this amounts to altering the basic structure of the Constitution. Parliament can't alter, but can the judges do it? They too can't do it. By way of interpretation here, a very important power of the executive is taken away and given to the judiciary, and it continues till today. So this is a case of basic structure being altered by the Supreme Court itself, which is wrong. Today, I say they must correct this wrong. They are as much bound by the doctrine of basic structure as the Parliament or the executive. Now, even though it is wrong and it is bad and opposed to basic structure, people didn't mind because the whole object was executive was making appointment of judges by on political and other consideration. I gave you the example of their superseding 3 chief judges and appointing somebody and so many other illegalities by executive. I have no grievance. Therefore, people thought if without political inference, the judiciary itself appoint judges, they will appoint meritorious. But unfortunately, experience has shown that this collegium system was a thorough failure. In fact, process of selection was far better when the executive had the upper hand than it is here. I don't want to elaborate on the ills of this collegium system. Almost every judges have also found fault with the collegium system. For want of time, I am not going to these details. But finding this collegium system to be bad, there was clamor for appointment of a judicial commission, independent commission to select judges. Therefore, 99th Constitution Amendment Bill Act was brought, and NJSC Act, that is National Judicial Appointment Commission Act, was brought. These two enactments were unanimously passed by both houses of parliament. And we thought we will have a good system of an independent body. And who is the selection body? 6 persons of 6 Chief Justice and 2 senior-most judges. Judiciary properly represented, 3 of them. And executive, only law minister. And 2 other eminent persons. Who is to select them? Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, and Chief Justice of India. He is there also. So these 2 eminent people representing civil society. This was the composition. Now, this is challenged on the ground that it is violative of the basic structure. And as I said, everybody can agree independence of judiciary is a basic structure. But how do you say a power which was vested with the executive, which is now sought to be vested in an independent body where the judiciary has more than 50% representation, how can you ever say that this affects the independence of the judiciary? It is impossible to think about it. In the whole world, I am told nowhere judges appoint themselves. And therefore, can we say nowhere in the world the judiciary is not independent? Can we say if we appoint ourselves secretly without anybody, even the executive or an eminent person from social life, nobody can interfere, we will do it ourselves. And if that is how it is to be done, can you say our independence is taken away? Therefore, the Supreme Court in this NJAC case, which is sometimes popularly known as fourth judge's case, it is also a totally wrong decision. Because of the wrong decision, the much maligned cabinet, this collegium system is continuing today. Even today, it is this collegium which selects judges, and we do not know the reason. We hear a lot of criticism which is in public domain. For want of time, I am not going into details. Few days back, there was an article which said that though the collegium has a principle that none below 45 will be appointed as a High Court judge, in the case of Justice Arun Mishra's brother, even when he was not 45, he is inducted as a High Court judge, keeping in view for how many years ultimately he will become the Chief Justice of India. Now, can the members of the collegium, that is the judges themselves, distribute this? Or can it be on the basis of these considerations other than merit? Therefore, I am of opinion that the mistake committed by the Supreme Court has to be corrected by itself. Because as I said, beyond Supreme Court, there is no other authority. If the Supreme Court is wrong, it has to correct itself. As is said, if the legislature or executive commits any mistake or commits an excess, immediately you go to judiciary and it is corrected. Immediate stay, later quashing. But if the Supreme Court itself commits a mistake, which is against public, where else we go? We can only go to the Supreme Court. So my appeal today is Supreme Court also has said in some rulings, repeating a mistake is not heroism, but correcting a mistake is the judicial imperative. This is the statement of one of the judges of the Supreme Court. And also judges, one American Supreme Court judge has said, while executive and legislature wrong, we can correct it. So far as our power is concerned, he says self-restraint is the only check. If we commit a mistake, it is our duty to correct it. So today, my appeal is the Supreme Court has done a wrong both in second judge's case and in the fourth judge's case. In this, both these decisions, they have given a decision in their own favor against the executive and the parliament. Now it is for them to reconsider, and very easily by constituting a larger bench, they can reconsider these two judgments. And I am not saying the power to appoint judges, you restore it to the executive. No, they are also wrong. It not, but let it go to an independent body like the National Judicial Commission, which is passed unanimously by the Parliament. Very rarely such a unanimity we find where the political parties are at loggerheads. Therefore, my appeal in the NJAC case, there is a well-reasoned dissenting judgment of Justice Chalamishwar, where he upholds the validity of the 99th Amendment and NJAC Act. That dissenting judgment should become the law of the land. The Supreme Court must show statesmanship, judicial statesmanship, and then reconsider its decision. This is my appeal to the Supreme Court, and this is my appeal to the legal fraternity to fight for the end of this system of collegium. Only yesterday itself, I found Chief Justice A.P. Shah, former Chief Justice of Andhra, and Sri Dushyanta Dave, who is the leading lawyer and the president of Supreme Court Bharat Association. Both of them have also pleaded that this collegium system should go and NJAC Act must come into force. Friends, I think I have taken a little more time than what I should have done. I once again thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and I also simply admire your patience. I hope you have heard me. One great advantage of this pandemic is that you will not be seeing the audience. You don't know whether they are listening or not, or whether some have gone away. If a speaker starts boring, it is open to anyone to go away unnoticed by others. Anyway, I hope you have all heard me. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Indeed, it was great hearing from you. Sir, we can now proceed to question and answer session.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sir, there is a question from a participant that what could have been the impact if the case had been ruled the other way, and what would have been the present condition of India?
Yeah.
Sir, what do you think?
It is a very good question according to me. I forgot to mention that. If this ruling has been other way, if 7 had said power to amend is unlimited, today we would not have had this constitution. You all know how our parliamentarians have been behaving all these years. When it was assumed that the parliament has unlimited power to amend, during Indira Gandhi's period from 1966 to 1977, 11 years, there were 25 constitution amendments. And emboldened by the fact that they have the power, 42nd constitution amendment would have totally wrecked the constitution. Fortunately, 44th amendment came to our rescue, and more than that, Keshavananda Bharati saved us. According to me, because of the majority decision, democracy is saved and the country is saved. If the decision was otherwise, democracy would not have been there and our country would have been ruined.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, the next question is that what do you think would be the rationale of the judges which opposed the judgment? Sir, what do you think their logic must be?
Now, the point is, while interpreting a provision, one way of looking at it is literal interpretation. Another way is to find out the background and the circumstances and the need of the hour. There are several rules of interpretation. If you literally interpret the word amend, it means you can amend anything. It is only make changes. But even literal interpretation, amend cannot mean abrogate. If you can't abrogate as a whole or repeal, can you do it by having 400 amendments? Article 1 is repealed, 2 is repealed, 3 is repealed. Can you say by amending, I have only amended, not repealed or abrogated? That will be fallacious. So the contention that amend means you can amend anything is not correct. In the word amend itself, there is an implied limitation, and this doctrine has rightly been evolved while giving meaning to the expression amend.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, the next question we have is so, sir, does the application of basic structure doctrine apply to the constitutional amendment or any amendment in law made by the parliament, or it can be tested on the touchstone of the basic structure?
No, it is settled law that this restriction on the basis of doctrine of basic structure only is constitutional amendment. And in the Indira Gandhi's case, that is reported in 1980 Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has specifically said an ordinary law cannot be amended on the touchstone of basic doctrine of basic structure. It is only constitutional amendment. Ordinary law you can challenge only on two grounds: want of competency or other procedural violative of fundamental right, not on the basis of basic structure.
Thank you, sir. Sir, can the often discussed concept of constitutional morality be said to be an offshoot of the basic structure doctrine, or what started with the Keshwananda Bharati case? is the way of judicial innovation.
See, according to me, constitutional morality stands on an entirely different footing than doctrine of basic structure. Doctrine of basic structure, I agree, is culled out from Article 368. And more or less, what basic structure is, though not exhaustively defined, the judges have given illustrations. And they said, this is not exhaustive, you can add something to it. But constitutional morality, according to me, amounts to amending the constitution and amending the basic structure. Now, you are not able to say a particular law is violative of a particular provision in the constitution. If you are not able to say that, but still you want to invalidate it, you say it is opposed to constitutional morality. In my opinion, this concept of constitutional morality is a very vague and indefinite term which gives arbitrary power to the judges to invalidate a law which they are unable to invalidate on the basis of particular article. When you are not able to pinpoint the article which is violated by the law, you generally say, no, it violates the concept of morality. This, according to me, by now the Supreme Court has taken over to itself so many powers, including the power of appointment of judges, including their interpretation of Article 21, etc. They are all for the good. But now, involving or evolving a new concept of constitutional morality to invalidate a law is a very dangerous proposition. I'll give only one instance. This is a very recent innovation. Now, in Sabarimala case, this doctrine is adopted. Justice Chandrachud uses this concept of constitutional morality to strike down the provision for a bar of entry of women of a particular class. And the very concept of constitutional morality is used by Justice Indu Malhotra to uphold that bar. So you see, even among Supreme Court judges, in the earliest case, there is no unanimity what this constitutional morality means. It is a very dangerous proposition. So I respectfully submit there is no comparison between the two. Constitutional morality is a vague concept. It can be used for only asking all the constitutional functionaries to strictly follow the constitution, not to use it as a ground to nullify any legislation or executive action.
Thank you, sir. Now we would like to pass on to Neil Chandra for vote of thanks.
Thank you, Omkar. Good evening, everyone. As we all know, today's event was in memory of His Holiness Sri Keshavananda Bharati, who recently, and we all know that his name will forever be etched in this country. We pay sincere homage to the departed soul and hope that his name and his legacy will continue forever to remain in this country. I, on behalf of the Constitutional Law Forum and Think India, who spared time from his busiest schedule to grace the occasion. Today we had an opportunity to hear your thoughts, which have enlightened our mind and have shown us a new path. I express my gratitude to you for gracing the occasion and sharing your valuable opinions to me. We hope to see you in more such sessions. We are also fortunate today to have Mr. A.V. Rangam and Miss A. Subhashini, who are present among us, who have witnessed the historical judicial proceedings of Keshavananda Bharati and Golaknath judgment in the Supreme Court, with Shri S. Govind Swaminathan, the then Advocate General of the State of Tamil Nadu. I would also like to thank Senior Advocate DLN Rao sir for gracing this occasion. We are humbled by your presence, sir. I would also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Ganesh ji, Aditya ji, and Shivam ji for their contributions in making this event happen successfully. Without them, this would not have been possible. Lastly, I would also like to thank all the people who have joined us today in this talk, or should I call this journey of knowledge, and have played their part in making this event a successful. We hope to see you in some more of such sessions in the future. Thank you so much.
Kavya. Okay.
We will end the session now.
No, wait.
Thank you so much, sir. We are ending the session now. Thank you, sir.